By the year 25 BC, the Mediterranean world belonged to Rome. Having recently annexed Egypt, Emperor Augustus stood at the helm of the most formidable military superpower on Earth, with legions known for crushing anyone in their path. History records the slaughter of the legions in the Germanic forests of Teutoburg as Rome's definitive border. Yet decades earlier, a different disaster occurred in the mountains of the Middle East. This hardened sap is frankincense. Thousands of years ago, demand for this incense and exotic spices was so high, it drove the global economy. Augustus wanted total control over the ancient world's most lucrative commodity. The source of that wealth lay isolated at the extreme southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, a region Romans called Arabia Felix, or Happy Arabia. Today, we know it as Yemen, the home of the legendary biblical kingdom of Sheba. To secure this prize, the Roman governor of Egypt, Gallus, the prefect of Egypt, marched south with 10,000 troops, including Roman legionaries and Judean allies, assembled a massive invasion force. 10,000 elite infantrymen packed their weapons for a desert campaign. Because the Romans knew almost nothing about the deep desert, they hired a local Nabatean guide named Sylleus to lead the way. Rome had just spent centuries steamrolling over the greatest empires of antiquity. Looking at an isolated kingdom of desert merchants, Augustus and his generals assumed this expedition would be a quick, highly profitable victory. What the Romans failed to grasp was the sheer scale of the geographic fortress protecting the Sabaeans. Between the legions in Egypt and the wealth of Sheba lay thousands of miles of uncharted, intensely hostile desert. This map shows the invasion route Gallus planned. The Roman army would cross the Red Sea to land on the western coast of Arabia, and from there march relentlessly south. To survive the journey, they were entirely dependent on Sylleus to navigate. The logic behind this massive risk comes down to supply chains. The southern Arabians were acting as middlemen, getting incredibly rich by marking up goods flowing from India and the East before selling them to Rome. Augustus wanted to cut them out entirely. Gallus's expedition was a hostile corporate takeover backed by 10,000 swords. Executing that takeover meant conquering an environment Rome did not understand, relying on a guide whose loyalties they never bothered to question. The campaign began with a disaster. Before the infantry even started marching, Sylleus directed the Roman transport fleet through treacherous, rocky coastal waters. Dozens of ships and their crews were shredded on the Red Sea coral reefs. Once on land, things got worse. Instead of taking the established, relatively safe caravan routes used by merchants, Sylleus intentionally led the legions through roadless, waterless wastelands, keeping the Roman army wandering in circles beneath a suffocating sun. Forced to drink bad water and scavenge unfamiliar herbs, the troops began to fall apart. A terrifying regional disease swept through the ranks, causing scurvy-like paralysis around their mouths and devastating their legs. For 6 agonizing months, the army dragged itself through the deep sand. The prolonged exposure completely drained their supplies, their morale, and their manpower, turning an elite invasion force into a procession of the sick and dying. The invincible Roman war machine was being systematically dismantled. Without a single enemy army taking the field, one local guide managed to turn the Arabian landscape itself into a lethal weapon against the empire. Eventually, the battered, emaciated survivors crossed the threshold into southern Arabia. Instead of the endless sand dunes they expected, they witnessed a geographical anomaly. Arabia Felix was lush. The Romans found themselves staring at high mountain peaks, monsoon-fed streams, and sprawling, meticulously carved terraced agriculture. It was the absolute opposite of a barren wasteland. This oasis didn't exist purely by accident. The Sabaeans were master hydro engineers. They sustained their capital city with the Great Dam of Mareb, a massive reservoir system built 700 years before the Romans ever arrived. As the legions approached the capital, they were confronted by architectural grandeur that rivaled their own. The Sabaeans worshipped at temples constructed from massive stone pillars, paid for by centuries of dominating the global spice trade. Gallus and his men finally reached the high walls of Mareb and laid siege to the city, but they had nothing left. After just 6 days of sitting outside the gates without adequate water or food, the starved, diseased Roman army completely broke. Rome had marched through hell, expecting to easily conquer a loose band of simple desert merchants. Instead, they shattered themselves against the walls of a highly advanced, hydro-engineered superpower. Realizing they were on the brink of total annihilation, Gallus ordered a retreat. Driven by panic and desperation, the shattered remnants of the army fled back toward the safety of Egypt, covering the return distance in just 60 days. The casualty reports recorded by ancient historians expose the true scale of the disaster. Thousands of elite Roman soldiers died from sunstroke, hunger, and disease. Only 7 men actually fell in combat. This map illustrates how Augustus reacted to the defeat. Rome permanently abandoned the idea of a land conquest in Arabia. Instead, they mapped the monsoon winds, establishing a maritime sea route from Egypt to India that bypassed the Arabian interior entirely. This expedition became a foundational trauma for the early empire. Decades before the famous destruction of the legions in the Teutoburg forest, the Arabian disaster proved to Rome that their imperial expansion had hard, lethal limits. By surviving the Roman onslaught, the Sabaeans preserved a highly complex culture. They held on to their wealth, their local gods, and their own written language, leaving behind dense geometric inscriptions as proof of their distinct civilization. Defeating the greatest military power of the age cemented Merib and the surrounding mountains as an impenetrable fortress, a place where outsiders marched in but rarely marched out. For 2,000 years, the highlands of Yemen remained an anomaly. While Rome annexed Nabatea, and the Rashidun and Ottoman empires claimed the coastlines, the interior mountains remained isolated. The same terrain that broke Gallus supported an unbroken imamate that repelled the Ottoman Empire in the 16th century, perfecting a style of mountain warfare that relied on the landscape as a primary defense. This historical lineage of resistance continues into the modern era, manifesting today in the unyielding mountain-based operations of Ansarallah. The Roman legions learned the cost of entering these mountains 2 millennia ago. Modern powers are still discovering that while you can invade Yemen, its geography and its people cannot be held. That fiercely independent nature set a powerful precedent. For the next 2,000 years, the unforgiving geography and the resilience of the local tribes continued to repel foreign colonization attempts. Rome is remembered for conquering the known world, painting the map with the blood of its enemies. But the kingdom of Sheba secured eternal glory by standing as the one magnificent prize the empire could never claim.